Einstein is reputed to have said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world or something like that. And it goes back to that story you probably learned when you were in grade school where somebody did something for the king and the king said, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "Well, let's take a chessboard and put one kernel of wheat on the first square and then double it on the second and double it on the third." And the king readily agreed to it. And by the time he figured out what 2 to the 64th amounted to, he was giving away the entire kingdom. So it's a pretty simple concept, but over time, it accomplishes extraordinary things.
Brilliant minds unlocked.
Imagine it is Tuesday morning, exactly 6:04 a.m. The screech of the alarm clock goes off in the dark. And it isn't just a sound, you know. It is an intruder. It's the audio signature of someone else claiming absolute ownership of your time.
Yeah, I mean, it is essentially the sound of the contract you signed with society coming due for another day.
Right. And today we're doing a deep dive into the actual mechanics of the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. We've pulled together a massive stack of essays, financial blueprints, case studies, all custom tailored for you, the listener.
It's a lot of material to get through, for sure.
It is. And our mission here is to figure out if this is just like a spreadsheet cult for people who hate their commutes, or if there is an actual actionable mathematical trapdoor to buy back decades of your life.
Yeah.
Because I have to play the pragmatist here.
Naturally.
I look at this concept, and my immediate reaction is just heavy skepticism. I mean, is this just another internet fad? How does this actually make you time or money in the real world?
I totally understand the skepticism, I really do. But you're looking at these blueprints through the lens of like a standard financial brochure. If you zoom out, what we're actually analyzing here is a highly advanced architecture for ultimate mental optimization.
Yeah. Okay, mental optimization, that's a strong claim.
Well, it's true. This isn't a movement about inheriting wealth or hoping for some massive liquidity event. We're looking at this underground network of engineers, public school teachers, middle managers who have discovered a literal glitch in the system.
A glitch?
Yeah, they're completely bypassing the standard 40-hour, 40-year grind decades before they're supposedly allowed to.
Okay, well, let's unpack this glitch.
Yeah.
Because to understand the escape route, I mean, we first have to map the prison, right?
Yeah.
The case studies we gathered present this archetype we're just going to call the standard professional.
People call him Alex.
Yeah, Alex. So Alex did everything exactly the way the system told him to. He got the optimal degree, he landed the high-status job, he's securing that predictable 3% annual raise every year. But instead of feeling successful, he's waking up at 6 a.m., spending an hour in a metal box on wheels, surrounded by thousands of other people in their own metal boxes, just crawling toward buildings they don't even own.
To do work he likely doesn't find meaningful, just to buy things he doesn't actually need.
Yeah?
I mean, the brutal underlying physics of Alex's situation is that he's taking his most precious, completely non-renewable resource, his time,
Yeah.
and he is trading it for a fiat currency that is actively being inflated away.
I hear that, but let me push back on this immediately. Because the blueprints diagnose Alex as suffering from what they call lifestyle creep.
Right, a classic trap.
He gets a raise, he buys a better car, he gets a promotion, he upgrades to a luxury apartment, he buys nicer shoes, and the text frames this as some catastrophic failure. But let's be real here, isn't wanting a better car or a nicer zip code just basic human nature? Like, we want the dopamine hit.
Right.
We want to see the physical rewards of our labor. Why is upgrading your life suddenly a failure?
It's not a moral failure, it is a massive failure in systems architecture. You call it human nature, but what Alex is actually falling victim to is an unchecked cognitive bias known as hedonic adaptation.
Okay, explain that.
The socioeconomic system we operate in is engineered to convince him that the default goal is simply more. But more is an illusion. He gets a raise, he increases his overhead, he gets a promotion, he upgrades his liabilities.
So he's just treading water.
Worse. He's running faster on the treadmill, but his geographical position hasn't changed an inch. These case studies diagnose him not as a success story, but as a high-earning slave.
A high-earning slave. I mean, I'm just not buying that terminology. The guy makes 150 grand a year. You can't call him a slave.
A gilded cage is still a cage, right? Look at his metrics.
Yeah.
He is generating high revenue, absolutely. But his operational costs are scaling equally fast,
Sure.
leaving his actual profit margin, his freedom margin, at near zero. If his burn rate matches his income, he has zero leverage. The breakthrough for Alex wasn't securing a better job or a higher title.
What was it then?
His breakthrough was hitting a wall of absolute exhaustion and finally asking the most dangerous question a modern worker can ask, which is, how much is enough?
Man, how much is enough? That is dangerous, because the minute you define your enough, you stop being a perfect, predictable consumer. You just break the dopamine loop.
Precisely. You stop operating on society's default settings and you start looking for an actual exit strategy. You realize that more is a horizon line.
Right.
You can walk toward it forever, but you will never actually reach it.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the escape. How does someone like Alex actually get off this treadmill? The blueprints outline a strategy where you save a massive, honestly, almost uncomfortable percentage of your income.
Yeah, extreme savings rates.
And you, the listener, you probably already know the basic math behind things like the $5 latte rule. We aren't going to sit here and act shocked that investing $5 a day over 30 years compounds into 45 grand.
Right, that's just basic compound interest.
Exactly. But the strategy outlined here goes way beyond skipping coffee. It requires what they call the Great Lean.
The Great Lean is where the theoretical meets the practical. It's the phase of discovering the invisible thief. And the thief isn't external inflation or taxes.
It's your own habits.
Exactly. It is your own daily, unexamined habits. It's looking at every single dollar as a unit of captured energy and asking if that energy is being deployed optimally or if it's just, leaking out of the system.
But the execution of this is so extreme. I mean, Alex cuts his expenses by 50%. He moves to a smaller apartment. He sells the car that has heavy monthly financing.
He liquidates the liabilities.
Yeah, and his friends think he has completely lost his mind. They invite him out to expensive dinners, and he just outright refuses. So my question to you is this. Is the grand biohack for wealth really just to live like a monk?
No, it's not.
Because where is the competitive advantage in making your life deliberately smaller, alienating your professional network, and looking like a cheapskate just to save some capital?
That is the standard pragmatic pushback. But it fundamentally misinterprets the entire strategy. The Great Lean is not about deprivation. It is entirely about maximizing your mental ROI, your return on investment.
Okay.
You're not making your life smaller, you're making it aerodynamic. You are ruthlessly cutting the bloat to build an impenetrable fortress of independence.
A fortress.
Yes. Every expensive dinner he turns down, every financed car he liquidates, that is him systematically buying back future hours of his life.
I get the mental ROI argument on paper, but cutting your life in half sounds like a miserable way to spend your prime earning years. Prove to me the math is worth the misery. Because even the case studies admit this phase is a total grind. They literally call it the boring middle.
The boring middle is an exceptional term because it highlights the reality of the process. It doesn't mean you're miserable. It means you're experiencing a total lack of external validation.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that's a crucial psychological distinction. The boring middle is a test of psychological endurance. You are quietly, systematically automating your investments into low-cost index funds. Your capital is compounding. The physics of money are working in the background.
But externally, nobody sees it.
Right. Externally, your life looks incredibly static. You aren't flashing a new watch. You aren't posting photos of a financed luxury SUV.
So it requires supreme discipline to just ignore social signaling. You have to be totally comfortable looking like you are losing the game to everyone around you while quietly winning it on a hidden spreadsheet.
Exactly. You are trading short-term social status for long-term systemic autonomy. You're actively recalibrating your dopamine receptors to find satisfaction and security rather than consumption.
Okay. I will accept the premise that you can optimize your capital deployment by cutting your overhead in half. But here is the pragmatic wall I hit. How do you actually know when you are safe?
The math tells you.
But let's say you, the listener, actually execute this. You save aggressively. You want to walk away from your paycheck in your 30s or 40s. When do you know, mathematically, that the money won't just evaporate by the time you're 70?
This is where we shift from psychology to hard data. The definitive proof of concept for this entire movement rests on a piece of academic research from 1998 known as the Trinity Study.
The Trinity Study. 3 professors at Trinity University who ran massive historical market simulations to find what they called the safe withdrawal rate.
Yes. They were searching for the exact mathematical threshold of escape velocity. They wanted to find the point where the gravitational pull of your annual living expenses could no longer drag your investment portfolio down to zero.
And they found a number?
They found a specific mechanism. If you can accumulate 25 times your annual expenses, you achieve escape velocity.
Okay, let me stop you right there and put this in a different analogy just to make sure I am tracking the actual system's architecture. I don't want to just throw huge numbers around.
Correct.
Let's say my life is a power grid, and the operational cost, like the electricity required to keep my house warm, buy my food, run my life, is 40,000 kilowatts a year.
What the Trinity Study is saying is that I need to build a $1 million solar farm.
Your solar farm analogy is highly accurate, but let's look at the underlying physics of why it actually works.
Sure.
If you build a $1 million solar farm, which represents your diversified investment portfolio, it passively catches enough sunlight to generate power. Historically, the U.S. stock market returns an average of about 7 to 10% annually over long timelines.
Right, but inflation eats away at that purchasing power. We just talked about that.
Correct. Inflation is the operational drag on your solar farm. It historically averages around 3%. So if your farm generates 7 to 10% and inflation degrades it by 3%, you are left with a real inflation-adjusted return of roughly 4 to 7%.
Okay, the math tracks.
So what the Trinity Study proved is that if you only withdraw 4% of your initial portfolio value every year, adjusted for inflation, the statistical probability of that portfolio surviving a 30-year or even indefinite timeline is nearly 100%.
So if my life requires 40 grand a year, I withdraw exactly 4% from my $1 million solar farm. And I do that indefinitely without ever having to shovel coal into the furnace myself.
Without touching the principal architecture. In this state, your money undergoes a fundamental transformation.
Oh, so?
It ceases to be a static number sitting in a checking account, slowly bleeding out to inflation. It transforms into a self-sustaining organism. It breathes, it fluctuates, it captures the collective economic growth of human productivity, and most importantly, it does the heavy lifting so that your physical body no longer has to.
It works so you don't have to. I mean, the math is incredibly clean. But here's where I'm going to challenge this 4% rule aggressively.
I figured you would.
The real world is not a clean academic simulation. We are talking about human psychology under pressure. What happens when the world hits back?
You mean market volatility?
Yeah. Let's look at the stress test in Alex's case study. He is halfway to his goal. He has hundreds of thousands of dollars invested, and then a massive macroeconomic shock hits. The market crashes. Red stock charts everywhere.
The inevitable downturn.
News headlines are screaming about a global economic meltdown. His personal portfolio plummets by 30% in a single month. His $1 million solar farm is suddenly valued at 700 grand. Doesn't this elegant system completely collapse the second human panic enters the equation?
It only collapses if you let your cognitive biases hijack your strategy. This raises the most critical point of the entire framework, which is the friction of volatility.
The friction.
Right. When the market drops 30%, the physical output of your solar panels hasn't changed. The companies in your index funds are still producing goods and services. The only thing that has changed is the market's temporary emotional valuation of your assets.
But the human instinct is to panic. I mean, when you watch your freedom fund bleeding out, running back to the perceived safety of a guaranteed bi-weekly paycheck feels like the only logical survival mechanism.
It feels logical, but it is a catastrophic strategic error. This is where the masses break. They panic sell at the bottom, converting a temporary paper loss into a permanent realized loss.
Yeah, locking it in.
But Alex demonstrates the ultimate competitive advantage here, which is emotional control. He understands a fundamental truth of capital deployment that most people ignore. Volatility is not a bug in the system, it's a feature. Volatility is the price you pay for performance.
Volatility is the toll you pay for the highway. It's not a stop sign. Man, that is a massive reframe. So instead of seeing a 30% drop as a failure of the system, how does he view it?
He views it as a systemic discount. He leans into the friction. While everyone else is liquidating their assets and fleeing to cash, Alex doesn't sell a single share. In fact, he accelerates his buying.
He buys more.
He optimizes the crash. He temporarily tightens his lifestyle even further, eating rice and beans, to maximize his capital deployment while the market is in a distressed, undervalued state. He completely separates his internal emotional state from the external macroeconomic weather.
He buys the fear. Which brings us to the actual climax of his trajectory. And this is the moment that makes the entire decade of the boring middle worth it.
The payoff.
Yeah. It is 5 years later. Alex is now 38 years old. He walks into his boss's office. He isn't angry. He isn't burning bridges or making some dramatic scene. He simply hands over a piece of paper, his resignation.
And how does the corporate architecture respond when a highly optimized performer tries to leave the ecosystem?
By trying to bribe him back into the cage, the boss immediately goes into retention mode. He offers Alex a raise, a promotion, the coveted corner office, more status, more money.
The standard playbook.
But here's the psychological shift that really jumped out at me from the source text. Because Alex has hit his escape velocity, because he has that $1 million solar farm humming in the background, the boss's salary offer is no longer a lifeline.
It goes from being a biological necessity to merely a suggestion.
Right. He doesn't actually need the money to survive.
Right.
And because he doesn't need it, he instantly becomes the most powerful person in that room.
Yeah.
He possesses the ultimate asymmetric leverage. He has the absolute power of the word no.
What's fascinating here is that the physical act of quitting is secondary. When Alex walks out of that building at 10:30 a.m. on a Wednesday, feeling the sun on his skin, looking at the traffic of everyone else rushing around, stressed out, perpetually terrified of their bosses,
He realizes he won.
he realizes the true nature of his victory. He didn't just retire from a corporate job, he retired from an entire paradigm.
The real conflict was never with his boss. It wasn't with his salary, and it wasn't even with the economy. The conflict was with the deeply ingrained societal conditioning that his human value was inextricably tied to his economic productivity.
He permanently decoupled his identity from his output. At 38 years old, he realizes he has 40, maybe 50 years of life left. And for the first time since he was a child, those years belong entirely to him.
Yeah.
He owns his cognitive bandwidth again. There is zero operational drag from a boss, a commute, or a mandatory meeting.
Which pulls all these complex systems perfectly into focus for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Because as we analyze these blueprints, we have to ask a vital question. Why does any of this actually matter to you?
Exactly.
Is the point of this entire deep dive to convince you to go live in a studio apartment and eat lentils for a decade just so you can quit your job?
I mean, if that aligns with your desired outcome, yes. But that is not the strategic takeaway here.
The real lesson here isn't necessarily about the retire early part of FIRE. It is entirely about the financial independence part. Independence means you can work because you want to, not because you have to. It's about optionality.
If we connect this back to how we started with that jarring 6:00 a.m. alarm clock, we realize that the vast majority of the population is living their entire lives in a defensive crouch.
Yeah, just bracing for impact.
They are perpetually terrified. Terrified of corporate downsizing, terrified of a medical emergency, terrified of the next credit card billing cycle. Achieving financial independence means you finally get to stand up.
You take back control.
It shifts your posture from defense to offense. It means you can take that highly risky dream job that pays 50% less but fulfills you creatively. It means you can bootstrap that startup idea without the paralyzing fear of starving. Or it means you can simply choose to stay home and raise your children.
It redefines wealth in a way that completely breaks the standard consumer model. Wealth is not the ability to buy a luxury vehicle or fly first class. Wealth is the ability to ignore things.
The power to say no.
Exactly. Wealth is the capacity to say no to a toxic work environment. You don't need to already have $1 million to start utilizing this framework. You just need to alter the fundamental mathematics of your daily capital deployment.
Right?
Every single dollar you save and invest is a soldier you are deploying to fight for your future autonomy. Every unnecessary expense you cut is a link broken in the chain.
You stop asking, when will the system finally allow me to retire? And you start executing the system's architecture required to buy yourself out. You take ownership of the timeline.
And that leads us to the uncomfortable challenge that I want to leave directly with you. Do not just open your phone and look at your bank account today. Look at your alarm clock.
Like your commute?
Look at the calendar invites from people you don't even like, and ask yourself the absolute hardest question this material presents. How much of your actual non-renewable life are you currently willing to sell just to buy things that simply don't matter?
It's a heavy question.
The exit door is not locked. It is built entirely out of compound interest, emotional control, and a daily discipline. The clock is ticking. Your only job is to make sure it is ticking for you.
But there is one final hidden variable you have to prepare for. If you actually execute this architecture, if you successfully optimize your savings, weather the market volatility, and buy back 40 years of your life.
You face the ultimate blank slate. Because the hardest question isn't actually how you are going to pay for your freedom. The hardest question is what on earth you are going to do on a Tuesday morning at 10:00 a.m. when there is no boss, no schedule, and absolutely nobody telling you where to be.